So Pacific Northwest coast, very graphic style artwork, very like heavy use of like black outlines for things. They usually use a restricted color palette. You'll see most common colors are like red, black, and you'll see some yellow, and then there's some of this like sort of teal looking blue. And a lot of wood carvings, right? They live in the Pacific Northwest, so they have like redwood trees and big pine trees and stuff to use. So you're going to see a lot of that incorporated in their art. All right. Moving on over to the Southwestern tribes, you'll see on the map there that covers not only part of the United States, but into what is current Mexico right there, right? So on the top, this blob on the top here is the ancestral Puebloans, and it's kind of just like what it sounds like. They're the Pueblo builders, right? They're the ones that are going to be building these permanent structures out of mud and dirt and stuff, and that covers the Four Corners area. It covers most of Arizona's top corner there, where like the Grand Canyon would be. It covers a chunk of southern Utah into Colorado and into a good chunk of New Mexico. And then below them, you have the, I don't know how to say that word, Mogollon, we'll say. And then over on the left, we have the Hohokam. I'm really not good at pronouncing some of these words, but you'll see one of my favorites, I think I have in the picture on the next. So Chaco Canyon's a really famous one. That's actually a national monument. And then Mesa Verde is a national park. And Mesa Verde is probably one of the most impressive dwellings in the entire, I would say, other than maybe the Mayans and the Aztecs, like permanent structures. It's probably one of the most impressive permanent structures that we still have from Native Americans. But we'll get into that in a second. So we know that distinctive Native American groups populated the Southwest area starting at about 7,000 BC, a very long time ago. We know that the ancestral Pueblos were built by like tribes like the Anasazi, the Mogollon, the Hohokam. I'm probably butchering all of these words. And we know they were farmers. Besides being hunters and gatherers, they also had farms where they were growing crops, especially corn, which is interesting. There's this whole story about corn where nobody really knows 100% where corn came from. There's sort of like some native plants that are sort of similar to corn way down into Central America, but it sounds like we've been cultivating that and basically genetically engineering it by selecting ones that taste better for thousands and thousands of years. And then it has spread all the way up into, North America and everywhere now, right? Everywhere grows corn. So it's kind of this weird thing where when they try to trace the ancestry of corn back, it was really hard to find like a wild corn plant that they actually all came from. But that's besides the point. So the Navajo, the Apaches, primarily hunted and gathered. So not all of them grew crops, but a lot of them did because they had, some of them even built irrigation systems off the Rio Grande and stuff, and actually had kind of complex farm agriculture type going on. It's kind of a mystery. Right around 13,000 CE, Common Era, a whole bunch of them just disappeared. And like the cliff dwellings were all just left in place, and then like pots and stuff were still sitting around on the grounds, and it's like the people just up and disappeared. So that's been an archaeological mystery for a very long time. Thanks to more modern DNA testing, they pretty much have figured out that they didn't completely disappear. If you take the DNA of modern Native Americans who are living in the area, a lot of them have ancient Puebloan roots and stuff. So it seems like there was crop failures, and rather than living in larger communities like Mesa Verde, they probably split into smaller communities and kind of just integrated with other tribes and stuff that were coming in. So I don't think they just up and vanished one day like aliens abducted them or something. They probably assimilated into other tribes and stuff and kind of spread out more. The European colonists encountered people partially descended from the ancestral Pueblos in about the mid-1500s. Like I said, the Pueblos were already like abandoned by the time the colonists got here. So there's my absolute favorite. That's right there. That is Mesa Verde National Park. It's in southern Colorado. And what I didn't know about, I went to visit it a couple of years ago. What I didn't know about Mesa Verde is you always see these pictures of this one, which is the biggest one. This is Cliff Palace. I didn't know there's like 600 of these in the national park, and some of them are not even in the national park. They're in the surrounding land around there. So like this is it's a natural cave. The rocks naturally break like this and like create these almost like kind of rainbow effect where there's an archway and then this sort of like chunk missing. And like in the back of here, I was lucky enough to get to take a tour. The tour is a little scary. You have to, I guess getting out is a lot scarier than getting in. So you kind of walk down a very narrow path down the cliffs that they've kind of built and stuff. And then you walk in here, and then to get out, they make you exit this side. And you actually have to go up a ladder that's attached to the cliff to get out of it. So it's a little bit, you actually have to, before you go up the ladder, you have to crawl through a pretty small hole, like a tunnel, and then go up a ladder. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart. But in the back here, there's actually, I don't know if you guys can see it, there's sort of like staining on the rocks and stuff here. That is from water that is leaching down through the ground and stuff. So it is sort of deserty, but water will come down and kind of create what we call desert varnish on the stones. And in the back here, there's enough water seeping through the back that they actually have their own water source in the back. It's a little stream, but they can like, fill up jugs and stuff. So they don't have to go all the way up the cliff every time they want water. They do have to go all the way up the cliff every time they want food. And we do know that they were raising turkeys even. They had some of the first domesticated animals. These guys were raising like up on the surface and stuff. And we think they were living on these cliffs and stuff just for safety. Like it's hard to attack a civilization that's like off of a cliff wall and down a steep little ladder. So, and this, the Southwestern art is really varied. This is really just a sampling here. These guys were very successful, so they made a lot of art. They made baskets like the one here, Sierra, on the top. They made beautiful pottery with glazes. Now, that's probably the only place that I've seen, and I could be wrong, it's one of the only places I've seen glazed pottery. The Northeastern Native Americans had pottery with markings on it, but it didn't have glazes. So they're actually gathering up certain minerals and stuff and grinding it up and making these glazes that can be fired on. And they love this black and white kind of pattern you'll see on a lot of the Southwestern pottery. And then the Navajo are kind of famous for their blankets with these beautiful patterns, these woven blankets and stuff. And we know they eventually had sheep and were making these wool blankets and that type of thing. So there's our Southwestern tribes. Plains Indians. A lot of times when you say Native Americans, I feel like a lot of us automatically picture the Plains Indians, right? They're the ones that are going to be living in teepees and structures made out of buffalo hide, right? They're also known for their horse culture, which is interesting because horses aren't native to the United States. I mean, they sort of are. If you go way back in the fossil record, there was ancient horses here, but they all went extinct for a very long time. And it wasn't until the Spanish got here in the 1500s that they brought with them horses and started trading with the Native Americans. And the Plains Indians love their horses. So once they got them, they domesticated and, well, they were already domesticated, but they had to bred them and made lots and lots of horses because that makes hunting buffalo a lot easier on horseback than running after them on foot. So it's one of the very few places where the Native Americans actually benefited from the colonists, at least initially. All right. And you can see the Plains Indians take up a huge chunk of the United States all the way up into Canada. It covers, all your flat states, basically, like Kansas and Texas and Ohio and all of those plain states, and even like half of Colorado. I know we always think of Colorado as having mountains, but half of it is flat. And then, same thing with Montana and stuff. There are parts of it that are flat. So when you think of Plains Indians, think of like horses and buffalo. Those are going to be like the two things that they're most known for. They're pretty much nomadic, right? They're going to follow wherever the buffalo go. So they can take down those teepees and move the whole civilization. Not the civilization. They can move the whole village wherever they want. And very quickly, like they can be packed up in a couple hours and like head off and follow some big buffalo herd. So you're not going to find permanent structures from the Plains Indians usually. Some of them had agriculture, although that's hard to do if you're moving around a lot. So not too many of them with agriculture, but some of them. And they also brought up maize or corn from Mesoamerica and were were actually farming it. I switched slides there. And then, of course, when the US government comes in and starts exterminating the bison, because when we started putting railroads and stuff through the country, those bison make a mess when they wander onto the tracks and a train is coming, right? Like, so they started sending people out and killing off the bison. And when they did that, they obviously sort of cut off the Plains Indians' main source of food. So that was very detrimental to them. All right. Here's a look at Plains Indian art. So because they're nomadic, we don't have as much art as we do from ones where like they had a more permanent civilization. So because their villages are keep moving. So, but we do have some stuff, like it's usually portable things for the Plains Indians, right? We have, that's a Lakota blanket strip. So it's all made of little beads and buffalo hide, and, you know, kind of woven together there. On the bottom right, you're seeing a cradle board with, it's made out of wood. Obviously the back part is wood there. Buckskin, right? That's going to be like, you know, buffalo hide. And then sinew, right? They'll take the tendons and stuff of the buffalo and basically make that into like really thick, like string in a way. Glass beads, thread, copper, iron tacks. Some of these things they're obviously trading with, you know, colonists and stuff to get, and some of them they have. So it's kind of like a baby backpack. Like if you ever have, like if you have little siblings or something, and like you ever seen little babies, like that's what they would put on their back. I know it looks like skis. Like you wouldn't send a child down the mountain on this or anything, but like you would wear that on your back, and the baby would be in there with his little face hanging out. I guess you couldn't get him out of there very quickly. Look, it has to be like laced up and unlaced to get your screaming child out of the backpack. So, and then up on the top right, I thought this was really cool. A little scary for me, but it's all claws, right? This is country where they have, you know, grizzly bears are pretty common in the edge of the Great Plains and into the mountains, and so that's a bear claw necklace with some of the fur still attached and stuff. All right, Northeastern Woodland Tribes. So that's us. That's where we live. I'm just checking my time here. 46. Okay, we got time. So one of the things the Northeastern tribes cover kind of a big area, and it's really like a bunch of you could probably break that up into smaller regions. Some people think like the Great Lakes is almost like its own region, which it kind of is. But so it goes all the way over from was that Wisconsin over there, all the way over to Maine and down the coast to Virginia, and even looks like a little bit of North Carolina there. You know, and of course, I've got some of the tribe names listed on this particular map, right? There's some of them are names that we've recognized, like Mohican and Mohawk and Oneida, right? Those Seneca, those are like New York names. The Delaware Indians, right, lived along the Delaware. So, and then like some of our place names, like look, Montauk, you know, like if you're familiar with Montauk or Wappingers, those are all those are tribal names. Mohegan, Pequot. There are a lot of those names that we still have like as part of our place names here in the Northeast. So they're known for their burial mounds, not so much here in New York, but when you get out to Ohio and into, I guess into Indiana, they got into like building these big earthworks, which are really impressive. I'll show you a picture of one in a sec. There's no buffalo here really, so they're not going to be using like teepees, right? We're going to need sturdier structures than that, especially with our winters up in the north here. So we're going to be using more wigwams, longhouses for shelters. If you think way back to 4th grade social studies, you probably remember like diagrams of some of those things. They had a trading system with wampum, and wampum is basically small beads made from clam shells, quahog. I never know how to say that, quahog shells. There's a little picture down there. You can see the purple and white areas, and they would be making beads from those. And if you ever go to the beach out in Connecticut or even northern Long Island, those are all over the place, those particular kinds of clamshells. And then they were able to develop the birch bark canoe. We know the Algonquins were using those, and later they kind of spread that around to other tribes, and early settlers even adopted the canoe as a way of getting up and down the rivers. And they usually lived in villages of a few hundred people, usually living close to their crops. So they are going to be growing squash, beans, and corn in this area. And so after about 10 years, they might move their village to find like, more fertile farmland, and then they would rotate back because you do have to rotate your crops. You can't just stay there forever. So they love to settle on hills above rivers. So honestly, any hill in this area that is somewhat close to like the Wallkill or the Delaware or anything like that probably at some point had Native Americans of one of these tribes living there. Okay, in the Northeastern Woodland tribes, so there's the mound that I was talking about. There's lots of these, there's hundreds of them, but this is probably the most impressive one. This is Serpent Mound in Ohio. It's huge, like you're looking at it. It's sort of a snake. And at the top of the snake, I don't know if you guys can even see my cursor, but at the top of the snake in the top right, there's sort of a big circular mound in the middle. They think that's supposed to represent like an egg or something like that. And on the bottom, they have these bird stones. So they did do some stone carving, which is interesting. We don't find them too much around here, but upstate New York, you do find them, and out more towards like the Midwest, like Ohio, you find them more. There's a piece of Iroquois pottery that you would find right here in your own very own backyard if you were lucky enough to find fragments of it. Usually you don't find a whole one, you'll find just a tiny piece. And that is an Iroquois wampum belt made of all those little purple and white beads that would be like basically like money that they would be trading back and forth there. So the Native Americans in this area would be taking something like this. This is flint. It's a relatively common rock. It's like a really hard rock. It kind of breaks like nice and gives like a nice sharp point. This is actually a piece I pulled right out of the ground in Pine Island area. And they would be shaping those to make things like this, right? This is an actual arrowhead. This is not a fake arrowhead. So this is an actual arrowhead from Pine Island. I picked it up out of the ground. You can look up arrowheads based on their shape and figure out basically when they were made. And I think I determined that this one is about 1,200 years old, so 1,200 years old. Is probably Lenape in design. And even though it's pretty darn old, I don't know if you guys can see that, it's also really sharp still. It came out of the ground just like this. If I really wanted to cut my finger or something with it, I probably could. It'd be definitely sharp enough to go into like a deer hide or something like that. So these things are around. They could be sitting in your backyard. You'd have no idea. You just have to look for them. Especially if you live near a farm and they plow the fields in the spring. It's a great time to go out like late spring when it's rained a little bit, and you can find these types of things around here. I've got this little guy. I got to pull him out of my box here. I probably should have opened that up before. This is an actual piece of pottery that I picked up also in Pine Island, or right outside of Pine Island. All right, so that's a little piece of Lenape pottery from about the same time, from at least 800 or so years ago. It's even got part of the design, so we know it's from the top edge of that pottery. So they would use like sharpened sticks or whatever to make the designs. And the Native Americans here didn't draw pictures on their pots. They would just make these patterns and stuff. They wouldn't, like the Southwestern Native Americans would be like drawing like turtles and suns on things and stuff, and we wouldn't necessarily see that here. I have a couple other goodies to show you. Let me pull this one out of the box. Normally I would pass these things around the classroom, but we're home. Oh my gosh, let me pull this one out. This one I found on the St. Lawrence River, which is at the top of New York. So this is from a little farther away. And I actually thought it was a piece of a tire at first, right? I picked it up and I was like, what is that? I was picking up sea glass or beach glass, and I thought it was a piece of a tire. And then I started looking at it and I realized, no, that's actually Native American pottery there. And it's got a different pattern on it. So what they would do is they'd wrap like a piece of wood with a bunch of twine, and they would like push those patterns into the actual pottery. So this is also a piece of Iroquois pottery from farther north. And then I skipped over. Remember we were talking about the glazed pottery of the Southwest? I picked up these two pieces north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. There was thousands of pieces all over the ground. I picked up just a couple handfuls of them off of private property. And you can see there's like actually a different glaze on the back of this one. It's gray with black. And then on the inside of the pot, they had this black and white. So, and this is probably at least 500 years old or so. And, you know, depending on where you walk, as long as you're on private property, you can pick them up and collect them. They're there. Grabs a bunch of those. All right, let me go back to the presentation here. Okay. Southeastern woodland, sometimes people combine both of these. They combine the Northeastern woodland and Southeastern woodland, and they are pretty similar. They're both going to use a lot of wood in their designs. They're going to have arrowheads the same as we do. They do have them separated out for our purposes. They're going to have a lot of agriculture. They have ranked societies where you'd have like, you know, a chief and then like sub chiefs, I guess. I don't know. And then like, you know, like the farmers and stuff. So they did have like, you know, different classes in their society. They are going to increase their populations and have trade networks, and they have their own wars against each other and stuff like that. They're definitely going to be highly agricultural, especially in the South, where like they have a good climate for growing crops, right? They've got good soil for growing crops. They get plenty of rain, so they're going to have all of that going on. Maize, beans, squash. Those are called the three sisters when you hear those three things together, and those are going to be grown a lot down there. And of course, they're going to continue hunting, fishing, and gathering as well. And you can see all the different tribes down in here. Choctaw being a pretty big one. Creek Indians, right? So you got some of those different tribes going on all the way down into Florida and across into Louisiana. Okay. Southeastern woodland tribes. Actually, the oldest known American art comes from the Southeast. And it's this bone that was found in Vero Beach, Florida. And they're estimating it's about 13,000 years old, which is super old. And it's even got a mastodon carved onto it. So I know I was always taught that like the mastodons were basically gone when the people got here. But it doesn't seem like that, because how did we know what they look like if that was the case? So this is officially, so far, the oldest piece of American art that we know of. And then we have this beautiful river cane basket right here on the right. I mean, the weavings of the Southeastern Native Americans are like just amazing. They have all those wonderful swamp grasses. If you've ever been to like South Carolina, Maryland and stuff, think of all the marshland, and they have all that grass to use. So they bundle it all up and they make these beautiful baskets. And then down here, you can see this sort of beaded cape collar thing here, which looks like it's made out of animal hide and beads put together. All right, we don't want to forget about our neighbors to the far north, right? Talking Alaska, Canada, and we're going to combine those two together because they are very similar. So we're talking the Arctic, which is way up at the top, and then the Subarctic, which is sort of the middle of Canada. So it's going to include the Eskimos, the Aleuts, I don't know how to say that last one, Athabascan, maybe. All right, and we know that they migrated into the area at least, I don't know, 15, 20,000 years ago. We know they came in at least 3 different waves, not all at once, depending on the climate and how thick the ice was up there. There's still a lot of Native Americans, obviously, in Alaska. They constitute over 15% of the population of Alaska. I'm not sure, but that's probably the highest percentage of any state that we have, as far as having still a Native population. I would put money on that. I bet you Alaska's got the most Native Americans left. As far as population, like as a percentage there. They hunt whales and other marine mammals. Of course they do. That's what they got up there, right? Mammals and wild birds. They're going to be fishing for seafood. They're going to be gathering berries where they can find them, greens and bird eggs. They're not going to be eating a whole lot of vegetables because look where they live, right? You're not going to find a Native American from the Arctic or subarctic that's a vegetarian. It's just not, because that is not what they have available to eat. Okay, if we take a look at their artwork, they have these beautiful blankets, again, all like woven or painted like this. I love the designs. It's very similar, you'll notice, and the totem poles are similar to the Pacific Northwest, and because geographically they're kind of close to each other, so you can tell that they kind of mingle their cultures here a little bit. Their artwork looks a little similar. They did have wood carving because they've got plenty of wood. And then this is a beautiful basket. Now they don't have a lot of necessarily a ton of grass up there to use. So this is woven baleen, which is it's the stuff in a whale's mouth that filters out all the plankton, right? So it's sort of stringy, and I guess if you work it enough, you can actually use it to weave. And that is actually walrus ivory, right? Walruses have tusks, so they can carve the ivory. And that little polar bear on the top is made out of walrus ivory. So interesting use of materials up there. It's going to be a little different than, let's say, the Plains Indians or something else. All right, let's not forget about those Hawaiians. We got the Alaskans in there. Let's get the Hawaiians in there, right? They can trace their ancestry all the way back to ancient Polynesia, where people were coming over from the Asian islands and heading over to Hawaii. We know that they were settled at least by the 3rd century. We know that Tahitians might have come in around like the 1300s and taken over, right? And then Captain Cook, I know that sounds funny, Captain Cook. It's not Captain Hook, it's actually Captain James Hook, arrives in 1778, kind of late as far as colonization and stuff. And then over the next 100 years, you'll see that the Hawaiians were almost nearly wiped out from diseases like influenza, smallpox, measles, or whooping cough. You know, and again, it's not like Captain Cook was like, here, I'm here to make you all sick. It just happened. You know, maybe it happened intentionally in some places, but it definitely like helped decimate their population. So they do have their own Hawaiian language, and I don't know how to pronounce it. It looks like Oliolo Hawaii, maybe, I don't know. You've all seen traditional dances like hula dances and stuff. Obviously, they have boats, because how did they get there without boats, right? And they're really good at this outrigger canoe. I put a picture of it up there just so you know what it looks like. It's basically a hollowed out canoe, and has an extra piece that sticks out to the side, and that really helps stabilize it in the ocean water and the waves and stuff. It makes it less likely to tip over. Very clever. Whoops. That was mostly it. So actually, as much vegetation as on Hawaii, almost none of it was edible, which is kind of weird to me. So the Polynesians did have to bring over a lot of edible plants from the mainland, as well as chickens, dogs, pigs, and stuff like that, and start breeding them on the island. Obviously, they have lots of wood on the island to carve, feather work, right? They've got a lot of tropical birds. You're going to see petroglyphs. Those are on rocks. Things made out of bark. And their tattoos are amazing. They've been tattooing themselves for thousands of years. So I even concluded in the artwork the tattoos, because I thought they were really cool and kind of unique. And then there's a wood carving there in the middle, and there's a cape on the right made out of feathers. That's actually all feathers. And then this fabric on the bottom is actually made out of different kinds of bark that's been like stripped down and woven together. So really interesting. You're going to see that the Native Americans are great at using whatever they've got available to make some beautiful stuff. And then we can't forget Mesoamerica, right? So we're going all the way down to the Aztecs and Mayans. And the Mayans are going to be in that green area there on the Yucatan Peninsula. And the Aztecs are going to be more over in that yellow area. And I think also sort of two different time periods. I'm not sure they overlapped as much as I always think they do. I think they're kind of a little bit separate. We know that they were flourishing for 1,000 years before the Spanish got here. And then the same thing, the Europeans get here, the Spanish specifically. They bring with them smallpox and measles, which is new to this whole continent. And almost 90% of the indigenous people, unfortunately, die off. So they were originally hunters and gatherers, but they were definitely growing a lot of crops by at least 7,000 BC, which is pretty early. And they had much more permanent villages and really complex architecture and religion and that type of thing. All right, Mesoamerica. So because they're so permanently based, there's tons of art. You can spend your whole life learning about Mayan or Aztec art, or together Mesoamerican art, right? We have some stone carvings there on the left and the top. They have a very kind of stylistic way of drawing things too, very like outline, kind of cartoony. That is beautiful Aztec stone carving down there at the bottom. I think that's made out of like turquoise and I think wood sap or something, it said. They built pyramids here. I have no idea how they really managed to do it, but there's huge pyramids all over. That is the Pyramid of the Moon. And then, of course, you've probably seen pictures of the Mayan calendar, because I feel like every once in a while they're like, the world's going to end because the Mayans said so, on this stone circle design thing. So there's our Mayan calendar. It's beautiful design, though. It's like it's basically a mandala shaped design. All right, we're getting there. Caribbeans. So here we got the Caribbeans, and the Taino is the major tribe or so that lives in the Caribbeans, and then there's a couple other ones, but the Taino kind of cover most of the major islands there. Obviously going to be doing lots of fishing, harpoons, nets, farming, right? They're going to be the first people that Christopher Columbus actually ran into on his 1492 voyage, and their first visit went very well. His other visits not so well, and things started to go bad very quickly, but they are the people that he encountered first. They live in circular buildings, bohios, I guess. I don't know how to say that, but you can see a picture of them down there, right? And then same thing happens. About 80 to 90% of them die off, unfortunately, when the colonists get here with smallpox. And forced labor didn't help either. A lot of them were captured and told to work in the fields for the colonists and stuff. So we see a population reduction when that happens. Some beautiful artwork, right? We have clay pots. We have they have their complex religion with these little. We get a lot of these little things, these little amulets and these little sculptures. You can see a necklace there, and some pretty interesting looking stuff. And that is the end of that.